This is the Beyond Barriers Unscripted Podcast.
Doesn't matter whether you're sighted or not. Come sit with us. I think that's the kind of the feeling I get.
Hello and welcome. My name is Randy Owen. In this episode, I speak with Pat Duffy. During our conversation, Pat shares about his journey coming to Society for the Blind, as well as his experience being welcomed into the blind and low vision community. Pat also shares about his hopes for the future of the Senior Impact Program as he himself approaches retirement. Before we get to that, I would like to ask that if you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing and maybe even sharing with a friend. If you have any questions or comments or ideas for the show, maybe an idea for a possible future guest, please feel free to email me. My name is Randy Owen, and the email address here is bb.unscripted@gmail.com. And now my conversation with Pat.
So I know you as and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are the program manager for the Senior Impact Program at Society for the Blind. But I also know you as what I always refer to as the building manager or the coordinator. You are the person that whenever there's an event going on in the building or there's things that, logistics that need to be arranged, you're the person to go to.
Well, actually, my title is Director of Senior Programs and Facilities Manager. At least That's kind of, those are the kind of words they've hung on me, but that was a good description of what I do. I came to Society for the Blind completely on a fluke. I'd moved to Sacramento a couple years earlier, after 20 years in the nonprofit sector in the Bay Area, and I worked with a startup nonprofit that didn't really go anywhere, and I was just kind of looking for something to do. So a friend of mine worked for Society. Her name was Carrie Mosher. She was probably gone by the time you got here. She was worked in a clerical position in the development department, and there was a position that was underwritten by a new grant that they'd gotten from the federal government for older individuals who were blind, and it was basically someone to set up a survey system. So it was a temporary position. It was going to last 18 months, and it was a contract position. I thought, okay, let's go for it. I mean, there's money coming in. So I went for it, and I was hired, and the day I started was they moved my start date back a week because the executive director at that point had just laid off a bunch of people at Society. So they didn't want me starting on the day that everybody was being laid off. So I started a week later and couldn't realize why everybody was, kind of reserved. And then I got this whole story that, they just laid off a half dozen people and you show up. That's why everybody couldn't figure out what I was doing. So, but I started to make friends. I realized what a family that Society for the Blind really is, and how people really did depend on each other. And even more so in most of the nonprofit organizations I'd worked in. So that was 11 and a half years ago, and here I am still. I'm not doing the clerical work anymore. I moved to the case manager position after about 8 months, and then was promoted to manager of the program in 2013 and director in 2014.
And you're getting ready to retire.
I'll retire May 28th is the magic date.
Okay. How has your life changed? So you said you just kind of landed the job. It wasn't specifically to work with folks in the blind and low vision community. How has your life changed since then?
I've become a lot more compassionate, if that is possible. I prior to this, I worked as the house operations director at Ronald McDonald House at Stanford, and that was a huge operation with lots of moving parts and lots of really needy people with all kinds of other issues coming in. So I was kind and compassionate when I started, but the blind community really invited me to climb inside your world. And I did that. I took went through the SIP retreat, the 8-day blindness skills day camp that we do. I spent my 8 days under learning shade. I learned how to use a cane. I learned how to not walk behind the counter at Starbucks at Arden Fair.
That's real talk right there.
That's a story in and of itself. But you invited me into your community, and I feel while still being a sighted person, I feel as if I am more immersed in your community than in any other one I've worked with.
You mentioned that you were at Ronald McDonald House as well?
That's right. Ronald McDonald House at Stanford, the big one.
So what is it about nonprofits or being of service? Because I mean, that's what we do. We work in human services, essentially. What is it about that draws you or keeps you committed? Because it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And my career has gone all over the place. I've done everything from being a pressman in a print shop to, working on the line in a kosher kitchen. And before I went into nonprofit, I had a career in manufacturing in the electronics industry in Silicon Valley. That took most of the 80s. And that was a fascinating time in Silicon Valley because everything was boom, boom. And, David Packard and Bob Noyce were still working at their companies at HP and Intel. So it was really exciting. And at the end of that, when all the manufacturing operations went to Singapore or to the Far East, there were a lot of us who were, casting around for what are we going to do next, because the production and the things that support production that wasn't being done anymore. And I had been volunteering for a nonprofit for a while, and a position came up. And so this is my life. This is just taking advantage of sheer dumb luck things sometimes. So I applied for the position on a long shot, and they gave it to me because it was a newish startup nonprofit, and they thought I could bring some semblance of order from the private sector into it. And what I'd learned in the private sector about, how to run a meeting and how to keep people, focused on task and, soft skills like that this nonprofit didn't have. And so that's kind of where that came from. I also am a recovering substance abuser, and part of my spiritual path is to help others, to get out of myself and to reach out to others, and not to be a do-gooder, but just to give back to my community, whatever communities I'm a part of. The one thing that, when I was working in Silicon Valley, if you were with a company more than 18 months and you weren't included by somebody else, you probably weren't paying close enough attention. So with the 50 years that I've been on somebody else's payroll, Society for the Blind is still the longest I've ever worked in one place.
Have you ever felt like you just all of a sudden realized one day it's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I belong here.
Yeah, there were a couple of ahas. The same day as I wandered behind during our retreats, we used to take the clients to Arden Fair Mall and put them up, send them off on a task. And so they stuck me in the morning with Priscilla, my poor Priscilla. And so we decided to go get a cup of coffee. And how do I find Starbucks? She said, why don't you just follow your nose? So I did. I followed my nose right behind the counter. And the Starbucks people said, sir, if you want a cup of coffee, you have to go to the other side of the counter. And Priscilla was just watching this, laughing. But later that day, the director at the time, Michelle, gave me an assignment to go into a store and buy something. And so I decided I was going to go to Sears and buy an Allen wrench set because I needed one for home. And as I started walking down toward that ramp that goes down toward where Sears is, it all came together. All of the various instructions that I'd received during that past week came together and made sense. It all gelled, and I was able to go into Sears. I figured out where the carpeting was. I shorelined along the carpeting. I found the hardware department. I found somebody who worked there. We found the Allen wrench sets. I was able to pay for it with cash. Get out of the store without knocking anyone or anything over. And it was this kind of, now I understand. It was an opening of my consciousness, let's say. Some of the communities that are served by nonprofits get to be very, very clannish. Well, they circle the wagons and they say, we're like this and you're not, so you can help us, but you can never be part of. With several communities I've worked with, that's not the case here. And with Society for the Blind, it has been more, let us invite you into our world. Come on and join us. Doesn't matter whether you're sighted or not. Come sit with us. I think that's the kind of the feeling I get. Did that answer your question?
That's good. And I'm glad you tell the story about, because I was going to ask you to tell the Starbucks story.
I think it's something that's happened to almost everybody who's blind or low vision. We all have that oops but dumb moment. And if we let go, if we let our mistakes just kind of roll down our back and we learn from them, but we don't stay stuck in them, we move forward. They kind of propel us forward. But if we hang on to the mistake and what will people think of me, and wake up in the middle of the night thinking, what do the people in Starbucks think of me? They must think I'm so stupid. We don't move forward from that. We stay stuck.
Understood. I totally agree. Question. When you meet a new client, do you feel like there is a period where we have to prove ourselves to them to gain their trust?
I think trust is something that's earned. It's not just given out for free. So what we do, if a brand new person calls me and says, this is what I'm doing, they're already asking for help, because if they're on the phone with me, they're asking for help. And so I tell them the different ways that we can help them and start exploring, how does this dovetail into what you perceive that you need. So you're stuck at home. We don't offer housing, and we can't get you to drive again, and we probably can't get you to read again. But here are the things we can do, and here are the alternatives. How does that work with what you see yourself as your life path? And I keep it positive, rather than saying, somebody comes looking for transportation, and I say, we can't drive anymore. What I do is I offer the different transportation options that I know are around, and then maybe refer them to those, and maybe to a couple of other agencies that help in areas that we don't, like independent living centers. So at least but the important thing is to listen first. Rather than just, rattle off, okay, these are the things we do, and, pick as many as you want. It's like, what do you need? What are you looking for? And then let's see how we can make what we offer to you fit to what you need.
Are you ever asked if you have vision loss or if you're fully sighted?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
And how do you deal with that?
I'm sighted.
How do you deal with, have you ever dealt with somebody, okay, you're sighted, and somebody say, well, and then their attitude just changed towards you?
That doesn't happen too much. what I do is I say, I'm sighted. All of our instructors are blind or low vision themselves. So they're not going to be teaching you anything that they're not already using on a daily basis. And that's the introduction. So, I'm not one of the primary instructors. I kind of fill in where I'm needed. Obviously not in technology. We all know that. But, I can do a little bit of rudimentary O&M, and I can do a little rudimentary kitchen work. But, I make it very clear that the instructors are teaching things that they're using on a daily basis. Nobody has pushed farther at me and said, well, how do you know you're sighted?
Mm-hmm.
I might, what's in my back pocket, and I haven't said it yet, is, well, you used to be sighted too.
Looking back on childhood, if you're open to talking about childhood, is there, if you look back and you take a look at where you're at today, do you see, does anything stand out as kind of correlating or connecting you to where you are today? And I don't mean necessarily position or financial wise. What I mean is where you are in your heart and where you are being okay with yourself. I think a lot of us, I know myself, struggle with confidence at times. And even though we have to kind of come off like we're really confident, can you talk about that? Is that okay?
I grew up in New Jersey and was raised by Italians, second generation Italians. So I had a very vivid, and my dad was Northern Irish, so I had a very vivid upbringing. Came from a very large family, very large extended family. So what I brought from that is the importance of hard work, the importance of loyalty to your boss. Those were things that were, that my grandfather drilled into me. He said, if you do that, you'll do well. And he was a self-made man. I mean, he had no education at all and ended up in a supervisory position in his company. And then the value of the group, the strength of the group. My family was very close, and most of us still are. And those of us who are still alive are still fairly close. There are some individuals that just don't mix when you have that many, 26 first cousins,
sure.
And spouses and kids. But the feeling that feeling of being a part of this larger thing, that in Yiddish the word is mishpocha, the family. And so, in the various groups and communities, either work groups or, recovery groups or whatever I'm in, I look for that. I look for the way, do people connect with each other and feel as one, or is it just a bunch of individuals coming to visit and then drifting away? That's important to me personally, because that shows that people care, and that shows about each other, and it shows that people listen to each other. And we Italians, regardless of how much noise we make, we also listen very carefully. We don't look like or sound like we are, but we do, and we don't miss much. That's about what I got out of it. There was no blindness in my family. There's almost every other ailment known to man. But blindness is something that my immediate family, which is, out to the second cousins, missed. I mean, it just isn't in our gene pool. So that's kind of interesting. And this is where I ended up.
Can you talk about mentorship? As you were speaking about your family and kind of the guidance and example that was set, I know a big part of the Senior Impact Program is mentorship. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, my grandfather was my biggest cheerleader. I'm sixth from the end in my generation. And for some reason, I was one of his favorites. And he died right around the time that I was entering the workforce. when I was still in high school. I got my working papers when I was 15, and he passed away right around that time. So I didn't have that mentor during my early years in the workforce, but I remember the examples he set about, pacing yourself and about doing your research before you start on something, and not being afraid to say I was wrong, or not being afraid to change directions if you find that's what you need to do. Those are things that I remember that I brought with me into my work life and into my life, basically. And I was, there were pieces of my life where I was a big screw up. But that stuff is stuff that I have kept in my tool bag. Did that answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you.
Now, the mentors we have in the Senior Impact Project are people who have already experienced what the new people are about to experience in, a learning situation or in a support situation. So they're like the tribal elders, maybe. We might want to do that, who just kind of guide the newbies along. And that is something that is a measurable value. And part of the value is that it's not doesn't have strict limits on it. Like, you are going to sit with this person during the support group, and you are going to call them twice afterwards, and blah, blah, blah. But it's encouraging people to make bonds with each other, and however that works, go ahead and do it.
How do you feel about the statement, you must make the necessary mistakes to conquer the skill, or to, become an expert at that skill?
I agree with it. The only person who hasn't made any mistakes is the one who hasn't tried anything. And I can say, being deep into my 60s at this point, that we do build up a reserve of caution once we cross that 60th birthday, just so you're aware that's going to happen.
I think it happens at 48.
Why stuff that we used to do in our 30s and 40s. If mistakes are a learning process, and the criminal thing isn't making a mistake. Maybe the criminal thing is browbeating somebody else who's made a mistake. That's pretty unforgivable. But that's how we learn. We have to be willing to fix the mistake. We have to be willing to get up and try something new once we've made that mistake. But I think in order to be successful, I have to be willing to make mistakes.
What's something that stands out that totally surprised you or caught you off guard? Something positive.
When I was at Ronald McDonald House, it was the Ronald McDonald House for Lucille Packard Hospital on Stanford campus, and there were a lot of really sick kids there, and these are like heart transplant kids and bone marrow transplant kids with leukemia, and lung transplant kids with CF. I mean, this is really sick kids, and it put the families who we were taking care of and lodging under some incredible strains. And a lot of marriages didn't survive it. Actually, more kids than marriages survived it. But there is one mom, and I'm still a friend of hers on Facebook, and I'm still in contact with her. She's probably the person I admire most that I have run into. She had a big Mormon family. She had a daughter, 3 sons, and daughter, a son, and then twins. And one of the twins was waiting for a heart transplant, really sick little kid. And as he was waiting for the heart transplant, his older brother was diagnosed with cancer. So her husband was back in Idaho working, and she was here with these kids. And the daughter was like 14. You know how charming 14-year-old girls can be sometimes, especially when they're stuck in a place that isn't home with not a whole lot of people around them that
Yes.
are their age. So yeah, So the way this woman carried herself and her burden with such grace and with such panache and with such good humor has really inspired me to, when I'm feeling sorry for myself or I'm feeling overwhelmed, I look and I say, your problems are nothing compared to some people. So just sort out the problem, take one thing and take the next step. And that's what she did. And I've been able to write letters of recommendation for her as she's moved up the career path that she has chosen over the years. Because this is 15 years ago. And the kid who needed a heart had to have a second heart. He's doing very well with that now. He's almost 20. But just watching her and watching someone behave with that much dignity and that much grace inspired me to try and have that much dignity and that much grace, or some of that, and bring that into my daily life.
What advice do you have for the people who will follow you taking your role at Society for the Blind?
If something looks overwhelming, break it down into smaller pieces. You can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. That would be my first. There are going to be things that pop up that you don't know how to do. And so look at it, do the best you can. Nobody's going to die from a decision you make unless you're teaching street crossings and decide to go on break in the middle of the street. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Break the problem down into bite-sized pieces. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Most people love being asked for help, or asked for advice. That's when you make friends. Ask somebody for help or for advice when you need it. And so, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for input. You're not going to be marked down or get demerits for not knowing everything. What else? Remember why you're here. The bottom line is the thing we're here for is our clients. So if there's an either or decision to be made, and one of them will help clients and one of them not so much, let's take the one that will help the clients.
You also kind of seemed as one of those people, and I don't know, I kind of noticed this, it's encouraged at Society to kind of think outside of the box. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's encouraged because there's always more than one way to do something. So for instance, when the building closed, SIP took our support group, monthly support group used to draw about 45 people. It was just huge. It was many more people than we could transport, and almost more people than we could seat safely in the room we had. And then when the building closed and we all went on lockdown, we took that group onto teleconference and made it very easy for people to dial in and remember the password. And what we have is a group that meets twice a week now rather than once a month. It draws about 25 to 30 people depending on what day, whether it's a Tuesday or a Thursday. And it has a very loyal following, and we call it Coffee and Connect. So everybody like you pours a cup of coffee, comes, sits down in front of the computer, or dials up on the phone for the next hour. It's a support group, and it's topic discussion based. And our clientele love it. I mean, they're saying, well, when we open up, please don't take this away. Please keep this meeting here because we can get to this sometimes when we can't get to the other one. So that was one think outside the box that really worked. Another one was we had the 8-day retreats, and there was 8 days for eight people for 8 days. And instead we broke it up and while we were still partially open, offered 2 5-day versions a month of the same retreat. So we cut all the fat off and just just the very meat and bone of the retreat, but still were able to teach all the skills. We held it for 4 clients rather than 8, and what we found is the clients actually performed the same or better because they had more one-on-one guidance from the instructors and one-on-one attention.
Where would you like to see the Senior Impact Program go?
I would like to see it still change and evolve, grow and change and evolve. There are still 1, 2, 3, 4 people who will probably be retired by the time 5 years gets here, in addition to me. So the department will look very different. And so I hope that it keeps evolving and keeps changing along to meet needs.